Okay, friends, we're under the back of my Jeep J-20. And what have we got here? We got some Scotch lock connectors. Those are the kind of connectors shops will use if they want to get a job out quick. What it does, it taps into an existing wire, a little spade that slices through the insulation, touching the original copper inside the insulation. This one looks like it was used to add a trailer hitch connector, a 4-wire connector there, which somebody just snipped off. What does that mean for us? Well, that wire and that wire and that wire and that wire are live. They're still part of the system connected in with the old wires. So we got to clean it up. Got to remove the Scotch lock connectors and then heal the original wires with some electrical tape. I'm going to use some brush-on liquid electrical tape. It's going to be the easiest way to fix those wires.
Okay, here's those Scotch lock connectors and the wiring attached to the factory wiring. I'm going to pull all that out. To do that, I'm going to clip these little zip ties that they use to secure the additional wiring. Time to undo the Scotch lock connectors. There's a little clamp portion on one of these ends that sometimes has fallen off, like it did on this one. Just pry it open. And look at that mess. Ooh, look at that mess. And then the original wiring, you got to pry out from the little blade that sliced into it. There we go. Now you see it. How about a little cleaner on that? You can see the mechanism this thing uses and why it's not ideal. Alright, so here's the original wiring, and there's the slice right there that the Scotch lock connector made. With this, there we go, you can see it now. This blade just slices right through the insulation, makes contact, usually, with the wire, the original wire, and through that runs another wire off of it. It's not weather tight, at least this one isn't. Most of them aren't. It's not a great connection, and most of them have some kind of clamp, which apparently fell off of the first one I removed. So you pull back that clamp, and it just falls apart on you sometimes. And you got to pry the old wire. There we go. Out. Now I got to repair that. I got one up here. Pull back the clamp. And separate the two pieces, which on this are caked with mud and salt. Not the best combination for wire longevity or connection effectiveness, but hey, just has to work when the customer walks out of the shop, doesn't it? Doesn't have to work longer than that. Whoop, you lost your lighting source. There we go. Back in the light. Let's pull that clamp off of there so I get more access. There we go. Just pry up underneath the original wire. Pry it out of that connector. And that's it. The old wiring is out of the way. Goodbye, old dodgy wiring. There are trailer connector harnesses that actually plug in between the original plug for the light and the plug for the wiring harness. Those are preferable if you get them, because they don't involve compromising the connections here. This wiring, I don't know if you can see it here, it's kind of broken up, so I'm going to repair some of this while I'm in here. I'm going to do more than just cover up the broken connection, the split insulation where the Scotch lock connectors went. I'm going to try and clean this all up, as I have a problem. Ooh, look at that. Look at that. Ugh. This spade connector, or not spade, a bullet connector, just broke off entirely. That's going to hurt the chances of this wiring working properly. Alright, so next task. Clean up all these wires. Repair the damage from the Scotch lock connectors. Replace this connector here. And put it all back together. Alright, let's get to it. Okay, underneath in the back corner of my pickup truck is all the wiring for the back lights. And as usual with any wiring repair job, a wiring diagram is your friend. So you know what you're looking at, what's damaged, what might be causing you problems. So, let's go through the wiring here quickly. The blue wiring here, this blue wire here, that comes from the front, goes to this connector here, then goes to this connector, and then goes out and down. That all belongs to the illumination circuit. And that was tapped into right here, so I'm going to have to repair that. The turn signals. The passenger side turn signal runs off of this brown wire from the front. That doesn't connect, obviously, to anything here on the driver's side. It was tapped into right here. And that goes off to the passenger side. The passenger side turn signal, the driver's side turn signal, comes in on this gray wire, and that goes up to the taillight connector here, and that was tapped into. The connector, the final wiring, the final wire is this brown with the trace wiring to distinguish it from the brown without a trace that goes over to the turn signal. The brown with this little white trace line on the wire, that is the backup light. And that was the one that broke over here. I'm going to have to fix that separately. So all the wiring in the back is in need of some kind of repair or another. First repair we're going to do is just putting some electrical tape, some liquid electrical tape. Let's start with the one furthest away from us so that as we work outward, we're not going to touch it as it dries. So what I'm going to be using is just some of this Starbright liquid electrical tape. There's a little applicator brush. You don't need a whole lot, but you need enough to just to wipe on each side of the wire right here where it was punctured. Give a nice coating. Just dab it on. You don't want to brush it on too hard because then that just brushes it right off. But it sticks pretty well. Alright, we'll go back over that with a second coat after that dries. Our next wiring or repair right here on the illumination circuit. Let's wipe it on. And again, I'm just covering that little break in the insulation. The wiring itself, if it was corroded or if it was broken, I would replace it with an actual splice. But this is good enough for now. If it gives me problems in the future, I can always cut it apart and do a proper splice. And then the final break right here. Little electrical tape on each side. It levels out. And again, you don't want to brush it so that the bristles are touching the surface of the wire. You want to brush it so there's a thin coating evenly around the whole wire. Alright, that's going to dry. And while that dries, I am going to go find a replacement bullet connector to plug into this connector for the backup lights. It's an 16, 18 gauge wire, not sure which, but I've saved some of the old wiring harnesses. I've clipped off the connectors. I should be able to find a bullet connector from the factory wiring harness that fits into this connector that I can just splice onto the backup light wire from the driver's side turn signal. Let me go do that, come back, splice it on, put another coat of liquid electrical tape around each of these spots where that Scotch lock connector grabbed onto it and split the insulation. Then let it dry, plug it all back in, and I should be good. Should be good to go.
Alright, let's see if my box of connectors from old wiring harnesses has what we need. Let's see. What we're looking for is a bullet type connector. A single connector like this. Alright, let's pull that apart. It's hard to do one-handed. That might be what we need. Alright. This does not at all dissuade me from my pack rat tendencies. I save all these factory connectors because when possible I like to use the factory style connector. I think that's going to work. Let's go outside and try it.
Alright, let's see. That little bullet connector, so that can be the right gauge to fit into this. And there we go. I felt it snap in. Alright. It's going to be the right connector. So now I just have to splice that on to the end of the other wire. And we should have a good nice fit. I'll put some dielectric grease around it to protect it from the elements. But it's the beauty of saving your old wiring harness. Alright, let's get that soldered on. Actually, I think I'm just going to use an insulated butt connector. That should work just as well in this application. Okay, I've gone ahead and crimped one of these butt connectors, but that has shrink wrap ends on it, to that little stub of a bullet connector I pulled out of my stash of factory type connectors. I'm going to now crimp that onto the old wire. I had to peel back some of this sheathing that Jeep uses to protect the wire. It actually crimps this sheathing around the wire, and what that does is it retains any water that gets in there. So when I clipped this sheathing, a bunch of water came pouring out of it. Not the best kind of protection, but we'll make something to protect it as well. Alright, so just twist that on, crimp it, making sure the wire's still firmly in there, and then give it a tug. Alright. Then I'm going to shrink wrap this, put another layer of shrink wrap over it, because on this connector, when you crimp it, apparently it exposes some of the metal from the butt connector underneath. So I'm going to put some extra shrink wrap on it. Alright. So this shrink wrap has some sealing liquid. You can kind of see it seeping out from the end, that claims to make it watertight. Well, I don't want to expose that right to the elements. So, got an extra little sleeve of shrink wrap. Once this cools off a bit, I'm just going to slide over and tighten down around that shrink wrap connector. So it has an extra little bit of protection. Alright. Now, the factory had a little short piece of rubber that served to protect that butt connector. Where did that go? Alright, I found that little piece of factory rubber end that Jeep used to protect and insulate the end of this connector. I'm going to help it out a bit with some dielectric grease. Not only help it slide on, but help seal it so that moisture and such doesn't get in there. There we go. And a well-repaired factory style bullet connector. Put that around there, and I'll use some of that around the connector itself. So when I plug that in, it'll be sealed from the elements. Alright, let's go back underneath, plug everything back in, clip it all back into place. Okay, let's put a second coat of electrical tape on each of those breaks that I covered earlier. If I missed any spot on the first layer, the second layer will take care of it. There, and that was our brake right there, wasn't it? Alright. This liquid electrical tape shrinks nice and tight to the wire and kind of self-levels. So you don't have to worry if it's a little messy when you're putting it on. It levels itself out. Alright, that is that. So, I'd unplugged this blue connector from the driver's side light connector. Is that cleaned? Let's clean it with some electrical cleaner. Before we go putting it back all together. use brake cleaner to get the big junk off, and then when it comes time to prepare the electrical connectors to go back in, that QD electrical cleaner is my liquid of choice. Put a little bit of dielectric grease around the outside, so when it plugs in, it's got some chance of sealing. There we go. You can see the rubber from the bullet connector goes into the right up flush against the receptacle. It's going to be relatively watertight. Not perfectly so, but relatively. Alright, time to plug this backup light connector into the plug we just soldered on, or crimped on. I don't want to claim we soldered anything we didn't. Let's put a dab of this dielectric grease around the perimeter of this. And it'll be easier to plug it in on the other side of the frame, then pull it back through. There we go. There we go. That's that. Now time to wrap it all back up in the conduit. Pulled it from. This conduit is messy, but as long as the wires aren't broken, the grease and dirt on the outside of the wires should have no effect on the inside. Still want to cover it as best you can. This brown wire should go all the way in that conduit. That conduit carries the wiring over to the passenger side taillight across the back cross member, allowing these wires coming out to go over to the driver's side taillight. That brown one doesn't have to come out at all though. So let's push it back in. Once that brown one's in there, I'll tuck the rest in as best I can. And this is going to get clipped back up against the frame with some factory clips that hold it tight to the frame, up away from everything. One of them will go right up here. One go right down here. And that's it. All those connectors stay bundled up out there in the corner here. Ideally, not hit by any debris. But, well, that's how Jeep did it. Not the neatest, but worked for 33 years. Well, that's not really true. Worked for a portion of those 33 years. Hopefully, This will get it another 33 years. All right. That's it for the rear corner of this Jeep J-20.